Hey, it's Ethan. In this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about how to connect different apps inside of Zapier using APIs. So this is going to be your full crash course where we will talk about what APIs are, why they're important to understand the different types of requests, and how to connect them inside of Zapier. Then we're going to demo two different APIs. One, which will basically just be a practice one to use GET request and to learn how to set up the API modules. Then the next one will be a little bit more complicated where we'll be sending post requests, which we'll talk about in a second. So you can actually create social media posts via API. And so the reason that APIs are important is because if you don't understand them, you're limited by the number of apps that are inside of Zapier's library, right? So Zapier has a certain number of apps that you can connect with. If we go to Zapier here, you'll see this. So if I look at the apps, I mean, they have 7,000, but there's a bunch of apps that are not on here, right? So I'm trying to think of one. Maybe we try to connect something like TikTok or school or something like that. And we're like, oh, it's doesn't connect. See, there's no app that is available for this, or no API that's available for this app. So what you need to know is basically that you can basically connect any app that has an API outside of just what is natively integrated into Zapier. And then you can also customize those requests more. So let's say we go into Zapier and we try to set up a request here for, I don't know, Google Drive. This is not going to be the best example, but these are all the different requests. We have new file and folder, new folder, uploaded file. The same thing if we go to the next module, we have add a file, copy. So it's fairly extensive, but sometimes you'll run into these use cases where you want to do a certain action that is not actually listed here inside of whatever the native functions that Zapier has integrated into here. So you can think of APIs as basically just connecting apps that are not in their database, right? So this right here, when we're saying new file trigger, this is an API call. So whenever a new file is triggered, if we set up this trigger, it will send an API request over to Zapier. So Zapier is basically just a nice user interface for packaging API requests. It's basically just saying hey, we don't want you to have to understand how to use APIs. We're just going to give you this interface to help you connect apps. And all they're doing on the back end is just setting API requests for you. But if you want to create more custom solutions, it's just not an option to rely on Zapier's native integration. So why can I not delete this? So let's go into the types of requests that we can send. So there's a couple different requests: get, post, put, and delete. There's more than that, but these are the only four that you'll really need to know. So a get request, you can think of this as retrieving information from an app, right? So there's already information on the app. Let's say I don't know, you're using Twitter's API, right? A get request would be get me all of the posts that I've already published, or get all of the new posts on this hashtag in the last 24 hours, and it would get and retrieve all that information for you, which is different from a post request where you're actually sending information to the software, right? You are posting information. So if we're using the Twitter API example here, this would basically be let me create a new Twitter post. You're creating it, and it's creating a net new piece of data on that software. Now, a put request is kind of similar, but you're updating it, right? So there's already a post that exists. You don't want to get it. You want to update it and change it. So you're adding as a query parameter, which we'll talk about in a second. You're adding the ID of the thing that you want to update. So it's identifying what it is that you want to update. Then you're adding in the content of how you want to update it, and it's changing the information on the software. Then a delete is pretty self-explanatory. So there's a couple different key terms or things you need to know. So there's HTTP requests, which is what we'll be setting up to create these APIs. And JSON is the type of the way that you package the content in that API request. This is the you're creating different objects of data that you're sending, and the way that you structure that data is in JSON. Don't worry if you don't understand JSON. I'll show you exactly how to write JSON, give you a little 101 here in this video. But what you need to know is that's how the data is structured. And then the API documentation, if you go to any software and just look up I don't know, Twitter API documentation, this is where you will find all the information that you need to connect to that software's API. So if we look here, we'll get something like this, the X API, And I'll show you exactly how to like read this documentation and set this up in a second. What you need to know is that these are kind of the core terms of how to set them up. So there's a couple different APIs that we're going to set up here. We're going to start with the quotes API, and then we're going to go to Typefully, which is a content scheduling API. So let's head over here to Zapier and start setting some stuff up. Let me just delete this, create a new Zap here, so that we can set this up. So let's say we just want to send an API request. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up what is called a webhook. So this is a little confusing because a webhook is actually something that just caches data, which is completely different from an API request. I mean, not completely different, but they're very distinct separate things. So Zapier makes this a little confusing by calling it a webhook. But what you need to know is that this is how you set up these requests, right? So we're going to, it looks like actually in the trigger, it doesn't actually want us to set it up in the trigger. So we can just set this up. So this is really just retrieving information. I'm just gonna have to put this as a placeholder here, unless there's something else that I could put, potentially like adding a variable or something like that. Maybe I can like set a variable, just like something that is just set a time, maybe. New appointment. Oh, that's actually its own software. So anyway, it doesn't really matter what that is. What's most important is we go into this action step right here. And what we're going to do is, oops, I accidentally clicked the code. We're going to click the webhook button again. So we're going to add a step. We're going to do a webhook. And then now, because we're not in the trigger module, we're in another module, you'll see the different types of API requests, where there's the get, post, put, or custom. So what we're actually going to do is create the custom request here. This will allow us to make the request exactly how we want it to. So this will give us more options here, including the delete one. So let's just say we start with a get request. So we're going to head on over to quotes API. So this is an API using something called API Ninja. It's just like a bunch of different APIs. It'll give us a really good starter one to practice on. And so this API here, there's a couple different components of an API. So there is a URL, which is going to tell Zapier where to look for that API. There's the API key, which in the request is required basically to get the data, because you basically have to say like, I have an account. A lot of times you have to pay for API request. And so that's why API keys are required. And then there's the data. And so the data we're going to go through in the next one. In this one, we're just going to do the API key and the get request. So what we're going to do is actually take this URL here, and we're going to copy it into Zapier, into this URL right here. So that is telling Zapier where to look. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a header down here. The header is going to be the API key. The header is going to be a little bit different on every single API, but there's a couple of common ones. You'll either see like authorization and then the API key, or X API key. So in this one, it's X API key is the name of the header. We're going to add that in, copy it down there. We're going to grab an API key. So if you're using API Ninjas, you are going to need to go and grab your API key. And so you're just going to create a new account, just sign in with Google or whatever's easiest for you. And then you'll be redirected to a page like this, where you'll click show API key, and you'll copy that in here. And you'll copy that API key directly into this aspect of Zapier. And so now we have this is a get request, this is the URL, and then we have this header. So now if I click continue in test step, we're going to see that we actually got a response. So this was successful. And in response, we got this quote, the author, and the category. And so this is basically that. Now if I go back to the API, because this is the quotes API. So we sent this request, and our response looks something like this. We have the quote, author, category. We didn't need to put any other parameters because we're just retrieving a random quote. It's a pretty simple API. So now what we could do is let's actually change this to Google Sheets. So what we could do is potentially just like get a bunch of Google Sheets data, add it in here. So maybe we just like search rows. Whenever there's a new row, Well, yeah, let's see if we can build this out. So like whenever there's a new row, we're going to send a request and get a quote. So we're gonna sign into Google Sheets here. I'm gonna sign into my account, and I'm gonna pause it real quick. That's right. You can see my email. You can email me if you want. But that's not the main email I respond to. So this is, so we have that connected. So now we want to actually choose a spreadsheet. We're going to choose one. Let's just create a new Google Sheet, and we're going to call it something like, we're going to call it like quote generator, random quote generator. We're going to add a, call it new row, quotes, author, category. We're going to add these as the column names. And then we're going to say, so ideally how this should work is whenever a new row is created, which probably means that there's some data in a new row, then it will create it. So what this means, what we are wanting this to do is whenever we add data into a new row like that, it will create a new one. So now we're going to do random quote generator. The worksheet is sheet 1, trigger in the, oh, I think this is actually the wrong one. I just recorded this video for make.com APIs, so it might be different. So, or let me call it like second quote generator. So let's make sure that we get the right sheet here. So let me refresh results. There we go, second quote generator. And then we want it to be when select a value. So when there's a new column and new row. So test trigger. Boom, we got it with quote, with column number 2. We're gonna send a request. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to Google Sheets and we're gonna update that row. So we're going to update spreadsheet row, continue. We're going to pull that spreadsheet, second quote generator, sheet 1, and then the row is going to be select value for row. I think this is going to give us a variable. Row ID. All right, so let's use the variable row ID. I think it might have worked the other way. I'm not entirely sure. And then inside of the quote, we're going to add the request data from quote, the request data from author, the request data from category. So now that that's finished, we're going to run the entire thing. All right. See if it works. So now if we go back here, we should see, boom. Let's reformat this a bit, but you'll see, boom, now we got a new row. So whenever we do this, we have to turn this on first, obviously. So this is going to be, we'll call this like, let's rename it. We'll call this like random quote generator. Boom. So now this is on. So now how this should work is that whenever we create a new row, it should generate a quote. So let's see if it works now. Is it going to be instant? As soon as a new event happens. So this should, it's probably on a little bit of a delay, but this should run and just trigger and basically like create a bunch of new ones. So last modified 34 seconds. New row. Okay, so let's see the history of this here. See if it's actually, yeah, no results found, task usage. Boom. Okay, zaps. So for some reason it's not catching the trigger. Maybe there's something that I'm not understanding correctly about how the new or updated spreadsheet row works. Show all fields. team drive. But let's say we go into edit this Zap, we just run it. So it's either on a delay or the update row isn't working correctly. But essentially, this is how we're pulling data from a API request into a Google Sheets. So let's actually create a new Zapier, and let's actually do a post request instead. And maybe we'll just leave this in the background to see if it wants to update while we are waiting. So let's create a new Zap. And now let's create a new API request. So this time, let's say we want to create a new one where we're creating social media posts. So we're going to be using something called Typefully API. So Typefully is this social media scheduling platform where you can schedule threads, you can schedule LinkedIn posts on the Threads app, stuff like this. So this is actually where we're going to practice sending post requests. So this is the Typefully API. This is what Typefully looks like, and their user interface looks something like this. You can see there's like drafts, you can schedule them out, you can create like threads and basically schedule them. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So I'm actually going to delete these so we can see it work in real time. I'll delete that. So inside of Typefully, I think you could probably get on a trial and get an API key. But what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the API and set this up. So this one's a little bit different. As you can see, there's the word bear here for the API key. But the first thing you want to do whenever you hit an API is you want to go into the endpoint here. So we have the endpoint, the webhooks by Zapier. We're going to create a custom request again, continue. This time we're going to create a post request. We're going to put the URL in here. And then we're going to add the header, and then this is where the data is going to go. Okay, so now what you need to know is that there's a couple different things. So we always have to add the API key in. So it's showing us how to create the header right here. So it says include this in the header. So now we have bear Typefully API key. And now what we want to do is actually grab this API key. So I'm going to generate a new one. I'm going to copy this. And it looks like they actually have a native Zapier integration, but I'm still going to show you how to do this just so you can see. So now we have this, and if we just run this, it's probably going to fail because we have no data in it. So if I test this step, it failed. You do not have permission. Oh, that's probably something with the API key actually. But it could also be something regarding this. So let's go back to the configure. Let's make sure that this API key is correct. X-API-key. Let's actually add some information. So this is where we're going to add the JSON into our scenario. So JSON basically means you have this forward bracket, this end bracket, then you have a list of objects or an array of objects. All that means is that it's going to look something like this. So here's an example of JSON. You can see it will give an example here. It's like a content object in this, and then these are all potentially different objects that we can add into our API request. So for this specific one, create a draft. It'll show us what the end of the URL is going to look like. So we're going to add the /drafts one here. And what we want to do is essentially we're going to add that at the end of this URL. So /drafts. And then we're going to add in this JSON. So we're going to basically copy this content. And let's just add in this is a new tweet that we are creating in Typefully. And now if we send this request, it should actually send the data over. Oh, and so method get not allowed. So for some reason it's trying to create a get request even though this is a post request, which is very odd. So let's reconfigure this. Let's make sure that this is a post request. And then boom, headers, continue, test step. So for some reason it looks like Zapier is trying to pass a get request, which it should not be doing even though it says post request right here. So let's see if their AI can help us understand why they're sending get request, and then if not, yeah, so maybe let's just recreate this, but let's actually use their native one. So here inside of Zapier, let's actually send something using the webhook, and let's just let Zapier set up a post request for us rather than trying to do a custom one. Let's do all the same steps here. So we're going to grab this URL. We're going to go -drafts. I think we have to add another one in. Payload type JSON data. Okay, so basically Zapier tries to help like create the API request for you. So sometimes it is actually trying to create the JSON for you. So I'm going to show you exactly what that means. So we're going to make sure that we have the API request or API key in here. We're going to add the API key in. I'm going to go and get my API from Typefully. Going to get that. Where is it? API integrations, copy. We're going to go over here, add that in. I think it wants us to put bear in front of it. Yeah. So sometimes it's tricky like this. So now you see how there's this object and then this text. So what this means is that like traditional JSON code is going to look something like this. Like, let me just say, like, ask ChatGPT, write me some example JSON. So it has a very specific format, and the way that Zapier works is they're trying to actually create that format for you. So if this is what JSON looks like, you have this open bracket, these objects. So this is the object, and then this is the value. This is the object value. So this is a string, this is an integer, and then sometimes you have a Boolean, true or false. So these are like, this is what JSON looks like. So now the thing with Zapier is that they're trying to make it easier for you. I actually don't like this as much, but basically they're saying like, just put the object straight inside of here. So what we can end up doing is rather than creating it as custom JSON, we can just add the objects in. So you can see like we have content is required, it's a string. So it's like, this is a string of text that we will be adding to Typefully as a Twitter thread. So it's basically just creating this for us. So now I'm unsure if we actually have to wrap this in an array, but let's just run this and see if it'll run. So if we're gonna test the step, so it looked like it worked. A request was sent. So let's go over to Typefully and see if it worked. So boom, it worked. So this is a string of text that we will be adding to Typefully as a Twitter thread. So you can see when we just created this, it has each of these data points here. So what we can do now, we can actually add a value set here, and we can put any of these parameters in this value set. So let's say we want to use the threadify one. That's a Typefully's specific way of saying like, turn a long block of text into a thread automatically. And then maybe we want to put a schedule date in next. So you can see what type it is. So Boolean, that means it's going to require true or false. String is like a word, and then integer is like a number. And so here it says a string, but it shows you exactly what format it should be in, or this. So if you just read this documentation, it usually tell you what it wants it to be. So we're going to add threadify as true, and we're going to add schedule date is next free slot, which is also Typefully's way of saying like publish 2 Twitter threads a day. It's something I've used quite often in my automations. So now that we have this set up, what should happen is we won't, and let's actually go to ChatGPT and get a longer string. So write me 300 words of stringified text about AI agents. So what should happen is it should just write us a 300-word text about AI agents, which we can hard code into this API request. So wait for this to generate. All right. So now that we have this, let's hard code this directly in here to show you. This is to show you what the stringify means. So now if we retest this step with the new data, we will see something show up here. It's actually scheduled it automatically because we put schedule date as next slot. So in 2 hours, you can see it took this long string of text and turned it into a Twitter thread. This is something that I've used for some of my clients. I've built out marketing systems for them to post daily on Twitter. And we're basically using this exact flow where we're taking data from Google Sheets that we're generating using AI. We're creating an API request for Typefully to send all of that data, and then we're threadifying it, and we are scheduling it as the next date. So we can basically just send as many of these post requests as we possibly want. We can send like 20 per day if we wanted to, and it would just release these posts on a frequency that we set. So I set it to be twice per day at 12 and 5 p.m. You could set it 3 times per day, once per day. And this is something that I've actually built out custom using variables as well and using Airtable. But this is just way easier if you're starting out just to use it using this one API parameter. So that's how you create a post request. A put request or a delete request is pretty similar. I don't think there's any put request inside of this API. But let's actually see. So let's say Typefully looks like it's actually connected inside of Zapier already. So if we type in Typefully, we can basically see all the actions: create a draft, schedule a draft, schedule a draft. So you can see that this is schedule a draft to next free slot. That's exactly what we just did. So whenever you're connecting things inside of Zapier, such as schedule a draft and next free slot, this is all Zapier is doing. Zapier is just creating a request like this for you, and they're sending your data, they're sending in specific parameters, and they're basically handling whatever we just did manually on the back end. Which basically means that if there's an app that Zapier doesn't support, you can just create a request like this and just mimic what Zapier is already doing, but create it way more custom, right? And this is the same thing for like a schedule date. We could actually add this schedule date. Let's try it. So in the parameter of schedule date, let's just add this in here, 2025-01-03 time, but let's actually do like 01-07. And you can see we add in different parameters. We go to Typefully 01-07, it put it on the 7th, January 7th, or for some reason on the 6th, which is actually really weird. Did I type that in wrong? It's probably because it's set as 0000, so it's like the time zone thing. So this is basically a crash course on Zapier APIs. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you learned a lot, learned how to connect APIs inside of Zapier. I had a lot of fun recording this video. If you want to dive deeper, check out the school community in the description. I've just put together a bunch of courses on this. If you want to learn how to build AI agents, prompt engineering, if you want to pull some of the system templates from these videos and just integrate them directly into your scenarios, you want to learn how to do marketing and sales systems using automations, it's completely free, no cost to you. And you get a free onboarding call with me where I will walk you through different strategies for like what AI skills are highest leverage right now. We'll create an actionable plan for